The wind on Carsis 9 smelled like rust and old rain, and that was the smell Leo Bennett liked best. He was 12 years old, small for his age, with scraped knees and a habit of going where he was told not to go. That afternoon, he had told his mother he was riding his bike to the water tanks. He was not going to the water tanks. He was going past the fence. The fence marked the edge of the human colony, a ring of wire and old sensor poles that nobody bothered to fix anymore, because nothing ever came close enough to trip it. Past the fence was red rock and dry canyons and the broken stone ruins that had been there long before any human ship landed on this world. Leo's mother, Grace, studied those ruins for a living. She always told him the ruins were empty, that whatever built them was gone thousands of years ago. She was wrong, but Leo did not know that yet. He rode until the path turned to dust, then walked his bike the rest of the way, following a trail he had found weeks ago and never told anyone about. It led to a canyon the old colony maps called Sky Grave, a name nobody could explain. When Leo climbed over the last ridge and looked down, he stopped so fast he nearly dropped his bike. There was something in the canyon, something enormous. At first he thought it was a rock formation, a strange one, curved and layered like the bones of a giant ship. Then it breathed. The whole shape rose and fell, slow and heavy, and Leo realized he was looking at a living animal bigger than any house in the colony. Its skin was the color of old iron, cracked in places like dry ground. Long ridges ran down its back like a spine of stone spears. Its eyes were closed. Leo knew he should run. Every rule he had ever been taught told him to run. Instead, he sat down on the ridge and stared, and after a long while, one huge eye opened and looked straight at him. "Go away," said a voice in his head. It was not a voice like any voice he had heard before. It felt old, tired, like something spoken from the bottom of a well. Leo nearly fell backward off the rock. "You can talk?" he said out loud, his own voice sounding small and stupid in the empty canyon. "I am dying, boy," the voice said. "I came here to do it in peace. Leave me." Leo looked at the creature more closely now. He could see how thin its sides were beneath the huge frame, how the skin sagged where muscle should have filled it out. He did not know much about dying animals, but he had seen a sick dog once, back before they left Earth, and this looked the same kind of sick, just 1,000 times bigger. "What's your name?" Leo asked, because it was the only question he could think of that did not sound rude. "Valor," the creature said, as if the name itself was heavy to carry. "Now go, small human. This is not a place for your kind." Leo did not go. He sat on the ridge until the sun started to dip, ignoring the ache in his legs and the small voice in the back of his mind reminding him his mother would be furious. Valor did not speak again for a long time, but he did not chase the boy away either, and Leo took that as permission to stay. When the light turned orange and long shadows filled the canyon, Leo finally stood to leave. He looked down at the massive, dying shape one more time. "I'm coming back tomorrow," he said. "You will not," Valor answered, sounding almost amused despite himself. "There is no reason to." Leo shrugged, the way only a 12-year-old could shrug at something the size of a mountain. "I don't need a reason. I just want to." "Then get away from this place, human child, and let an old thing die the way it chose to die." Leo climbed back over the ridge, glancing back once. Valor had already closed his eyes again, sinking back into whatever quiet place he went to wait for the end. But something in the way the massive chest rose and fell seemed, just slightly, less final than before. That night, Leo lay awake in his narrow colony bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the voice in his head. Not yet. He was not sure where the words had come from. Only that when he had looked at the huge, dying eye staring back at him, something in his chest had refused to accept the word dying as the end of the sentence. He did not tell his mother. He did not tell anyone. He only made a promise to himself, the kind of promise only a stubborn child makes without thinking about how hard it will be to keep. Not yet, he thought again, and finally he slept. Far out past the edge of the canyon, past the reach of any colony sensor, something else had already begun to stir. Something that had hunted creatures like Valor for longer than human history had existed, and that had just, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of life energy where there should have been only silence and decay. It was listening. Word spread slowly in a small colony, but rules break even more slowly, and by the third day, No one had yet noticed that Leo Bennett was leaving colony grounds every afternoon with a backpack full of food he was not eating himself. He always told the same story: rock collecting, or bug hunting, or just needing space to think, and no one thought hard enough about a 12-year-old boy's excuses to catch him in a lie. He had learned the trail to Sky Grave by heart now, memorizing which stones were loose and which shortcuts saved the most time. When he crossed the last ridge on the third afternoon, he did not know if Valor would even still be alive. He was. Barely. The huge dragon's breathing had grown even slower. Each rise of his chest stretched out like it might be the last one. Leo scrambled down into the canyon without hesitation this time, dropping his backpack near one massive front leg. "I brought food," he said, though he had no real idea what a creature like Valor might eat. He had packed dried fruit, protein bars, even a can of preserved meat from the colony store, laying them all out like an offering. "I do not need your food, human child," Valor said, though his voice had lost some of its sharpness. "My kind do not die from hunger. We die from the ending of our purpose." "That doesn't make sense," Leo said, sitting cross-legged in the dust the way he had the day before. "Purpose isn't food, but you still have to eat something." Valor made a sound that might have been a tired laugh, if dragons could laugh. "You argue like your species argues about everything." Loudly, and without listening. "I'm listening right now," Leo pointed out. For a long moment, the ancient creature said nothing. Then, slowly, thoughts began to move through Leo's mind. Not words exactly, more like memories pressed gently into his own. He saw skies full of shapes like Valor, hundreds of them, flying over green and gold worlds. He saw cities built into mountains, songs sung between minds instead of mouths, entire generations of creatures who called themselves the Wernkin. Then he saw the shadow come. Not a war, not a battle with armies and ships, but something quieter and worse, a hunger that moved from world to world, draining life and memory from every Wernkin it touched, leaving behind empty shells where thinking, feeling beings had been. The Hollow Choir, Valor called them, though the name in his mind carried more dread than the words alone explained. One by one, Valor's kind had fallen, hidden, or fled, until only he remained, the last living memory of an entire civilization. He had wandered for centuries searching for others, and centuries more grieving when he found none. Eventually, he decided grief without end was not living. He came to Sky Grave, the place his ancestors had always returned to at the end of their lives, to finally let go. Leo sat quietly after the memories faded, feeling like he had been shown something too big for his chest to hold. "So you're just giving up," he finally said. "I am accepting an ending that has already happened," Valor corrected. "There is nothing left to protect. No nest, no kin, no purpose. Only an old body taking up space in a canyon." "That's stupid," Leo said, and immediately regretted how loud it sounded. Valor's eye opened fully for the first time since Leo had arrived, fixing on him with something between anger and surprise. "Careful, boy." "No, I mean it," Leo pushed on, his voice shaking slightly, but not stopping. "You said you're the last one. That's not a reason to stop. That's the reason you can't. If you die, nobody remembers any of it. Not the cities, not the songs, none of it. You said it yourself, you're the only memory left. If the memory dies, it's like none of it ever happened at all." For a long time, Valor said nothing, and Leo wondered if he had made things worse. Then, quietly, almost too quiet to hear, "No one has said that to me in a very long time." Leo returned every day after that, sometimes just talking about nothing, colony gossip, or stories about Earth he had only heard secondhand from his grandmother, or terrible jokes he had learned from older kids. Valor rarely responded with more than a tired thought or two, but he stopped telling Leo to leave. On the seventh day, Grace Bennett noticed the missing food from the storage locker and the muddy bike tracks leading past the fence line, and she followed them with her heart hammering, expecting to find her son hurt, or worse. Instead, she came over the ridge to find Leo curled asleep against the side of a creature the size of a transport ship, his small hand resting against a plate of ancient, cracked skin. She did not scream. She did not run. She stood very still, staring, until one enormous eye opened and looked at her with something that was almost curiosity. "You must be the mother," Valor said inside her mind, and Grace's knees nearly gave out beneath her. That evening, after Leo woke and stammered through an explanation, after Grace had asked Valor question after question with the same stubborn persistence her son clearly inherited from her, she did not order Leo to stay away. Instead, she sat down beside him in the dust and listened. Somewhere deep inside Valor's massive chest, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his fading light steadied instead of dimming further. 300 million kilometers from Karsus 9, in the cold dark between stars, something changed course. It was not a ship in the way humans understood ships. It had no crew, no captain, no single mind steering it. It was a colony of countless small drifting shapes bound together into one vast intelligence, and it had spent the last several years drifting quietly through this system, tasting the faint old echoes of a species it had exterminated long ago. For years there had been nothing here worth its attention. Then, 3 weeks passed, a flicker had appeared. A pulse of life energy where there should have been only the last dying breath of a wormkin. The flicker had not faded as expected. It had grown stronger. The hollow choir turned toward Karsus 9. On the colony itself, life continued in its usual small rhythms, entirely unaware that anything had noticed them at all. Leo kept visiting Valor every day after his lessons, and Grace had quietly begun bringing her research tools to the canyon instead of the ruins she used to study, recording everything Valor was willing to share about his people, his history, his slowly steadying strength. It was the happiest either of them had been in a long time, and it was Captain Owen Reyes who first noticed something was wrong with that piece. Reyes ran the colony's small defense garrison, 12 soldiers, and a handful of aging drones meant mostly for scaring off local wildlife. He was not used to his sensors showing him anything interesting, which was why the sudden string of strange readings from the outer monitoring post caught his attention immediately. Energy drains with no clear source. Equipment failing for no mechanical reason. A shimmer on long-range scans that looked almost like debris, except debris did not change course on its own. He filed a report. Nobody above him took it seriously, because nothing ever happened on Karsus 9 worth taking seriously. That was the whole reason the colony existed here in the first place, tucked safely on the edge of nowhere. Reyes did not stop watching, though. It was a habit from his years before the colony, when not watching had cost him people he cared about. So when the outer sensor station went dark all at once, no warning, no distress call, just silence, he was the first one suited up and moving. He found the station intact but powerless, every system drained down to nothing, as if something had reached in and simply taken the electricity itself. There were no signs of attack, no scorch marks, no forced entry, just absence, cold and total. That same afternoon, in the canyon at Skygrave, Valor's calm shattered without warning. Leo was in the middle of telling him about a fight 2 colony kids had gotten into over a stolen toolkit when Valor's huge head snapped upright, eyes wide, body suddenly tense in a way Leo had never seen. "What's wrong?" Leo asked, already scrambling to his feet. "They have found me," Valor said, and his voice in Leo's mind was different now, sharp with something close to fear. "Who?" "The choir. The ones who ended my people. They can feel me healing, boy, growing stronger instead of fading, and that is something they have not felt in 10,000 years. They will not allow it." Leo felt his stomach drop. "What do we do?" "You do nothing," Valor said firmly. "You go back to your colony, and you stay far from this canyon, and you forget you ever met me. The choir does not simply take life. They take everything a life has ever touched. Your people are not prepared for what is coming." "I'm not leaving," Leo said immediately, the same stubborn certainty in his voice that had first kept him sitting on that ridge days ago. "You will get yourself killed," Valor said, and for the first time since Leo had known him, the ancient creature sounded genuinely afraid, not for himself, but for the boy in front of him. "I have already lost everything once. I will not watch it happen because of me a second time." Before Leo could argue further, the ground trembled. Far above the canyon, a shape crossed the sky, too smooth and too silent to be any kind of storm cloud, moving with slow and deliberate purpose toward the heart of the colony. Back at the colony perimeter, warning alarms finally began to sound, far too late to matter. Captain Reyes stood outside the darkened sensor station, staring up at the same strange shimmer crossing the sky, and felt, for the first time in years of quiet colony duty, the old cold certainty that something very bad was about to happen. He keyed his radio. All units, defensive positions. I don't know what that is, but it is not weather, and it is not friendly. In the canyon, Valor rose to his feet for the first time in weeks, every movement a visible effort, his massive frame shaking with the strain. You can barely stand, Leo said, fear plain in his voice now. Then I will stand anyway, Valor answered. Get behind me, boy. Whatever comes next, it does not reach you first. Above them, the shimmer in the sky began to descend. Nothing in Captain Reyes's 20 years of service had prepared him for a war meeting held in a canyon, standing next to a creature large enough to block out the sun. But that was exactly where he found himself 2 hours after the sky shimmer had retreated without attacking, apparently only scouting, according to Valor. Grace had insisted on bringing Reyes straight to the canyon the moment the danger became clear, ignoring every protocol about civilian movement during an active alert. Leo stood close beside Valor's foreleg, refusing to be sent away, and Reyes found himself doing something he had never trained for, negotiating a defense strategy with an alien the size of a building. You're telling me, Reyes said slowly, that thing in the sky was scouting us, and it's coming back with more. It is called the Hollow Choir, Valor said. It does not scout out of curiosity. It scouts to measure resistance before it commits its full strength. It will return, and it will not be alone. How many? Enough to end this colony, if you are not prepared. Reyes rubbed a hand over his face. 12 soldiers, some old drones, and civilian equipment never built for combat, against something that had apparently wiped out an entire species over thousands of years. It should have felt hopeless. Strangely, it didn't. All right, Reyes said. Then we prepare. What surprised Valor, in the hours that followed, was not the danger the humans were facing. It was how they faced it. His own people, when the choir had come for them centuries ago, had scattered, hidden, or frozen in despair, certain that nothing could be done against something so old and so total. These humans did not do that. Within an hour of Reyes's order, colony engineers were already stripping mining lasers down to their power cores, rewiring them for output they were never designed to handle. Grace, working alongside 2 colony technicians, began sketching plans on a tablet using notes Valor fed directly into her mind, translating memories of ancient Wernkin defenses into language human engineers could actually build. You said the choir tracks life energy, Grace said, looking up from her notes. Can we hide from that? Not hide, Valor answered. Confuse. They hunt by resonance, the unique pattern each living thing gives off. A single strong, false signal, placed correctly, can pull their attention away from the true target, at least for a time. Can you create one of those signals? Once. My own reserves are not what they were. But combined with the right technology, perhaps. That was enough for Grace. Within the hour, she had a team dismantling old broadcast equipment from the colony's communications array, rebuilding it according to specifications half human and half something far older, guided by an alien mind who had never in 10,000 years imagined working alongside creatures like these. Leo spent the day running between groups, carrying tools, relaying messages between his mother and Reyes and Valor, refusing every attempt to send him back to the safety of the colony center. He was tired and scared and did not fully understand half of what the adults around him were building. But he understood one thing clearly. Nobody here was giving up, and neither was he. By evening, the canyon had transformed. Turrets built from mining equipment lined the ridges, aimed outward at the open sky. Decoy resonance beacons, crude but functional, were scattered across the canyon floor and the surrounding ruins, each one broadcasting a false echo of Valor's life signature. Reyes had pulled every soldier and every able civilian volunteer into position, forming a defense line that would have looked laughable against any conventional military force, but which Valor watched with something close to disbelief. You built all this in a single day, he said, more to himself than to anyone listening. We're not great at giving up either, Reyes said, checking the charge on a rifle that had, 12 hours earlier, been a rock drill. As the light began to fade, Valor pulled himself upright once more, joints groaning with the effort, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the canyon floor. Leo watched him rise and felt something tighten in his chest, half pride and half fear. You don't have to fight, Leo said quietly. You're still healing. I chose death once, Valor answered, turning his great head toward the boy. A human child refused to let me keep that choice. I will not now refuse to stand beside the people who gave me a reason to live. Grace placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, and together they looked up at the darkening sky, waiting for the shimmer to return. Somewhere out past the reach of any sensor, the hollow choir was already moving, drawn by the flicker of a life it had once counted among the dead, and by a colony of strange, small, stubborn creatures who had decided, all in a single day, that they were not going to let that flicker go out. The first stars appeared. Reyes gave the order to power the defense line. And in the quiet moment before the sky above Skygrave began to change again, Leo reached up and rested his hand against Valor's leg, the way he had on that very first day. Not yet, he whispered. I hear you, boy, Valor answered. Not yet. The sky over Skygrave did not shimmer this time. It tore open. What descended into the canyon in the deep hours of night was not one shape, but hundreds, small drifting fragments moving together like a single creature made of countless broken pieces, blotting out the stars as they came. The hollow choir did not announce itself with sound or light. It came in silence, and that silence was worse than any battle cry could have been. Reyes's voice crackled over the defense line's radios, steady despite everything. Hold positions. Let them come to the beacons first. The decoy signals scattered across the canyon floor lit up with false pulses of life energy, each one broadcasting an imitation of Valor's true signature. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then the swarm shifted course, fragments peeling away toward the false signals, confused, searching, drawn by echoes that led nowhere. It was working, for exactly as long as it took the choir to realize it was working. The swarm's confusion did not last. Something within the collective intelligence adjusted, recalculated, and the fragments began converging again, this time correctly, straight toward the canyon's heart, where Valor stood waiting with Leo pressed close against his side despite every order to fall back. Now, Reyes shouted, and the ridge line erupted with fire. Modified mining lasers tore into the descending swarm, cutting bright lines through the darkness. Fragments scattered, some falling, most simply reforming and pressing forward. It was not enough, not nearly enough, and Reyes knew it even as he kept firing, buying time in the only currency he had left. Valor moved. Weeks of near-death stillness had left him weaker than he had been in centuries, but 10,000 years of memory still lived in his enormous frame, and when he finally unleashed it, the canyon shook. A wave of raw energy tore from his open jaws, ancient and terrible, scattering a section of the swarm like leaves in a storm. It cost him visibly, his legs buckling slightly under the strain, but he did not fall. Valor, Leo shouted, grabbing hold of the massive foreleg beside him as if his small hands could somehow hold the giant upright. I am not finished yet, Valor said, though his voice in Leo's mind sounded strained, thinner than before. The battle became a blur of light and noise. Reyes's soldiers held the ridge line as long as they could, falling back in organized stages exactly as drilled, buying precious minutes. Grace, stationed at the makeshift command post with the resonance controls, fed shifting patterns into the decoy beacons, keeping the swarm's confusion alive even as its true target grew clearer by the second. Then the swarm's central mass, larger and darker than the rest, broke away from the chaos and dove straight for Valor. This was the true heart of the hollow choir, the core intelligence binding the countless fragments together. Valor recognized it instantly, and something in his ancient mind, buried under exhaustion and grief, finally caught fire. You took everything from my people, he said, and his voice was no longer tired. It was 10,000 years of lost finding, at last, somewhere to go. You will not take this one too. He surged forward to meet the descending mass head-on, jaws closing around the dark, writhing core with every remaining scrap of strength in his ancient body. The impact shook the entire canyon, throwing dust and rock into the air, knocking soldiers off their feet along the ridge line. Leo was thrown backward, landing hard against the canyon floor, ears ringing, vision blurred. When the dust began to settle, he saw Valor standing over the shattered remains of the choir's core, sides heaving, blood the color of dark iron running from a dozen wounds. Around them, the remaining fragments of the swarm, cut off from the intelligence that had bound them, scattered in confused, directionless panic. Reyes's team, seeing the opening, pressed the advantage immediately, driving the disoriented remnants back into the sky with everything they had left. Within minutes, the swarm was gone, fleeing back toward whatever cold, dark place it had come from. Its ancient hunt on this world finally, decisively broken. Silence fell over the canyon, thick and unfamiliar after so much noise. Leo pushed himself up, ears still ringing, and scrambled toward Valor, who swayed unsteadily on his feet before finally sinking down onto the canyon floor, too weak to stand any longer. "Valor!" Leo shouted, running to his side, pressing both small hands against the cracked, bleeding skin. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare! Not after all that!" For a long, terrible moment, there was no answer. Then, faint but steady, a familiar tired voice moved through the boy's mind. "I told you," Valor said. "Not yet." Around them, Reyes's soldiers began to gather, exhausted but alive, and Grace ran down from the command post, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face as she reached her son and the massive, wounded creature beside him. Above the canyon, the sky had gone quiet again, stars visible once more where the swarm had blotted them out only minutes before. The battle for Skygrave was over. What came next, none of them yet knew. Healing a creature the size of a transport ship was not something any colony medic had ever trained for, but by the third day after the battle, half the colony's medical staff had somehow become experts in alien anatomy anyway, guided every step of the way by Valor himself, who remained too weak to do much more than answer questions and occasionally complain about the cold compresses Grace insisted on using for his wounds. He was healing, slowly but surely, in a way that made even the colony's chief doctor shake her head in quiet amazement. Leo visited every day, exactly as he always had, though now he no longer needed to sneak past the fence to do it. The whole colony knew about Valor now, and Skygrave had become the busiest place on Karsus 9, filled with engineers studying the ruins with new eyes, soldiers standing careful watch, and colonists simply curious to see the ancient creature who had saved them all. It was during one of these visits, nearly 2 weeks after the battle, that Grace made the discovery that changed everything again. She had been mapping the deeper tunnels beneath the ruins near the canyon, following structural patterns Valor had described from memory, old maintenance paths his people had once used to move between hidden chambers. Deep in one of these chambers, sealed behind stone that had not been disturbed in centuries, her scanner picked up something that made her stop walking entirely. A life signature. Faint, dormant, but unmistakably real. She called Valor immediately, relaying the scanner readings with hands that would not stop shaking. There was a long silence on the other end of their connection, long enough that Grace began to worry she had imagined the whole thing. Then Valor's voice returned, and it was different than she had ever heard it before, thick with something between disbelief and hope. "Show me," he said. "Please, show me now." It took the colony's engineers another full day to safely open the sealed chamber, careful not to disturb whatever ancient systems had kept its contents preserved for so long. When the stone finally gave way, they found a chamber lined with old technology, dust-covered and silent, centered around a single stasis pod built for a creature Valor's size. Inside, unmoving but intact, lay another Wernkin. Valor could not fit through the tunnel entrance himself, weakened as he still was, but Leo stood beside the pod and described every detail through their bond, watching Valor's reaction ripple through his own mind like a physical thing. "Old Rel," Valor finally said, the name emerging slow and disbelieving. "I thought every one of us who went into stasis had been found and destroyed centuries ago. I thought I was truly the last." "You're not," Leo said, grinning despite the exhaustion of the last 2 weeks. "See? I told you there was a reason to stick around." The colony's engineers, working alongside human doctors and guided every step by Valor's memory of ancient Wernkin science, spent the following weeks carefully reviving the stasis pod systems. It was slow, uncertain work, and there were no guarantees old Rel would ever wake. But for the first time and longer than he could remember, Valor found himself hoping for something beyond simply enduring another day. By the time old Rel's pod finally showed the first faint signs of returning consciousness, Valor had healed enough to stand fully upright again, his wounds closed, his strength slowly returning. He made his way to the chamber entrance himself, waiting outside because he could not fit within, listening through Leo's eyes and ears as the ancient stasis systems completed their long, careful work. When old Rel finally opened her eyes for the first time in centuries, the first thing she saw was a human boy's face peering down at her with open curiosity, and somewhere beyond the chamber entrance, a voice she had thought silenced forever, calling her name. Word of what had happened at Skygrave spread through the colony and eventually beyond it, carried on supply ships back toward the rest of human space. In time, official terms were drawn up between colony leadership and Valor, an alliance built not on treaties written by strangers, but on a bond that had started with one stubborn boy refusing to walk away from a dying stranger. Captain Reyes, never one for ceremony, marked the occasion by renaming the canyon on every official colony map. Skygrave became Skyhome. On a quiet evening not long after, Leo sat at the edge of the canyon beside Valor, watching the twin suns of Karsus 9 sink slowly behind the ridge line, painting the sky in deep orange and gold. Old Rel rested nearby, still weak but improving daily, her presence a quiet miracle neither of them had expected. So, Leo said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "What happens if the choir ever comes back?" Valor turned his great head toward the boy, something that might have been amusement moving behind his ancient eyes. "Then we will face them again," he said. "Together." Leo grinned, leaning back against the massive, familiar warmth of Valor's side, watching the last light fade from the sky above the place that was no longer a grave at all. "Not yet," he said quietly, echoing the words that had started everything. "Not yet," Valor agreed. "Not for a very long time."